Title: The Final Goodbye. Martin had spent his life hiding who he was, burying the truth of his heart deep beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. He had always known he was different, but for years, he chose to keep that part of him hidden from the world. His family, his friends, they could never know. Being anything but straight wasn't an option, not in the world he'd been raised in. But now, as the soft beeping of machines filled the sterile room and the scent of antiseptic hung in the air, Martin could feel the weight of his own secrets closing in on him. His body had betrayed him. His time was running out. There was only one thing left he could do, one truth that had been locked away for far too long. He would no longer carry the burden of silence. The memories flooded in of a time long ago when he'd been free in a way he had never felt in his entire life. It was a summer evening, the sun just beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over everything. He had been at a bar, sitting alone, when his eyes met the gaze of Mathew. Mathew, a name that had meant everything to Martin at one point in his life. Mathew was 6 years younger, carefree, and unafraid to show the world who he truly was. He radiated warmth and kindness, unlike anyone Martin had ever met. And for the first time, in Mathew's smile, in his eyes, Martin felt seen. They had started talking, and the hours slipped by unnoticed. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Mathew's laughter, his carefree attitude, and his way of making everything feel right in the world, they pulled Martin in deeper and deeper. It felt as if the two of them were the only people in the room. The entire night felt like a dream, but that dream wasn't meant to last. As the night came to an end, the weight of Martin's fear pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He couldn't do this. He couldn't let the world see him for who he truly was. He couldn't open his heart to someone like Mathew, someone who deserved more than Martin could give. The fear of rejection, the judgment, the life he had built for himself, it was all too much. And so, he let Mathew go. For the next few weeks, Martin couldn't stop thinking about Mathew. Every memory of their time together haunted him, but he buried them as best as he could. He convinced himself that it was for the best, that Mathew was better off without him. But Mathew didn't let go that easily. He kept calling, kept reaching out, and eventually Martin couldn't push him away anymore. They started seeing each other in secret, stealing moments away from the prying eyes of the world. Martin was torn between the love he felt for Mathew and the fear that gripped him so tightly. He loved Mathew, he truly did, but he couldn't let go of his fears, his need for safety. The life he had built would crumble if anyone knew the truth. Years passed, and Martin's love for Mathew never wavered. But the fear, the constant feeling of living a double life, weighed on him more and more. Mathew, despite his own love for Martin, began to change. He was a man who believed in living truthfully, without shame, without fear. But as Martin continued to hide their relationship, Mathew grew weary. He was younger, full of life and possibilities, and he wanted more than just stolen moments. He wanted to walk proudly beside Martin, to live their love openly. But Martin couldn't. He couldn't risk everything, his family's acceptance, his friends' approval. And so, the distance between them grew, until Mathew, heartbroken and confused, made the decision to walk away. The last time they saw each other was a bitter one. Mathew had come to see Martin, hoping that things had changed. "You don't have to hide anymore, Martin," Mathew had said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'll wait for you, but I can't wait forever." Martin had looked at him, his heart breaking, knowing he was losing the one person who had ever truly loved him for who he was. He reached out to touch Mathew's hand, but the words, the apology, got stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply watched as Mathew turned and walked away, leaving him in silence. The years that followed were filled with regret. Martin never stopped loving Mathew, but the truth was too painful to face. He had let fear control his life, and now, as he lay in that hospital bed, the reality of what he had lost hit him all at once. Mathew had been his love, his soulmate, the one person who had understood him, who had seen the real him and loved him anyway, and he had let him go. But now, as the beeping of the machine slowed and the end drew near, Martin knew there was one last chance, a chance to make things right, to speak the truth, to say the things he had never said. And so, He closed his eyes and waited. The door to Martin's hospital room creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Mathew, older now, his hair touched with gray, but still the same man Martin had loved so deeply. His eyes were filled with emotion, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "I never stopped loving you, Martin," Mathew whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought I would, but I didn't, and I should have fought harder for us. I should have never let you go." Tears filled Martin's eyes as he reached out, his hand shaking. Mathew took it, his touch gentle and familiar, and in that moment, everything that had been left unsaid, all the pain, all the regret, seemed to melt away. "I'm sorry, Mathew," Martin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be the man you needed. I was afraid. I thought I'd lose everything, lose everyone, and in the end, I lost you." Mathew leaned in, his forehead resting against Martin's. "You didn't lose me. You never did." As the tears fell, Martin felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to hide. He didn't have to be afraid. Mathew had always been there, and now, in this final moment, he was able to say goodbye, not in sorrow, but in love. And as Martin's eyes fluttered closed for the last time, he was filled with one final, bittersweet thought, that even in his final moments, he loved and been loved exactly as he was. It had been weeks since Martin's passing. The hospital room was quiet now, the machine silenced, the bed empty. The grief was still fresh, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Mathew had stayed by his side in those final moments, holding his hand, whispering sweet words, and giving him the peace he had longed for. But now, all that remained was the pain of saying goodbye. The funeral was small, just family, close friends, and a few people who had been part of Martin's life, but didn't know the depth of the love he had shared with Mathew. They stood around, paying their respects, but Mathew couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had loved Martin for so many years, and as much as he tried to move on, to build a life without him, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. The love they shared had never truly ended, not even with the passage of time. And now, with Martin gone, Mathew was left with nothing but memories and regrets. But one thing had been clear in those final moments. Martin had never stopped loving him. He had never stopped caring. And that truth filled Mathew with a bittersweet warmth. For all the years of longing and wondering, of waiting for Martin to come around, they had shared something real. They had shared a love that couldn't be erased. After the funeral, Mathew sat alone in his apartment, staring at the walls that felt too empty, the silence too loud. He had brought with him a small box, a box that had been hidden away for so many years. Inside were letters that Martin had written to him over the years. They were filled with apologies, confessions, and a kind of love that had never been fully spoken aloud. Mathew had kept them, even when he had no hope left, even when he convinced himself that he should move on. But how could he? Those letters were a reminder of what could have been. He opened the box and carefully pulled out one of the letters, running his fingers over familiar handwriting. Each word seemed to bring Martin back to life, filling the empty space around him. The letter was dated years ago, before everything had fallen apart. Mathew closed his eyes and read the words aloud. "I never thought I could love someone as much as I love you. You've been the one light in my life, and I've been too scared to let you in, too scared to let anyone know how I really feel. But now, as time passes, I can't stop thinking about you. I wish I had been brave enough to show you, to show the world the love we share. Please forgive me, Mathew. I'll always love you, even if you don't feel the same." The words toward his heart, bringing tears to his eyes. For so many years, he had wondered if Martin had ever truly cared. He had wondered if he was just a passing fling, someone to fill the void. But reading that letter, hearing the raw vulnerability in Martin's words, Mathew finally understood. Martin had loved him, always, and yet it was too late. The time for what-ifs had passed. The time for second chances was gone. But something deep inside Mathew stirred. He had spent years mourning the love he couldn't have, the future they would never share. And yet, he realized he had spent those years living in the shadow of their past, unable to move forward, unable to let go of something that had never been. It was time to let it all go. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up, walking to the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the city below. As he looked out, he imagined Martin beside him, as they had once talked about doing together, dreaming of a life where they could be free, where they could love without fear. Mathew had loved Martin in every way possible, and he always would. But he had to move on. He had to find peace within himself, just as Martin had found in his final moments. He stood there for a while, letting the calmness of the sunset wash over him, and then he made a decision. He would let Martin's memory live on, not in sadness or regret, but in the love that had always been there. He would take the lessons from their time together, the courage to love, the importance of being true to oneself, and carry them forward into the next chapter of his life. It wasn't easy. It would never be. But Mathew knew that in order to honor the love they had shared, he had to let go of the past and create a new future, one where he could love himself fully, without fear, just as Martin had never been able to. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mathew whispered softly to the wind, "Goodbye, Martin. I'll carry you with me always." And for the first time since his passing, Mathew felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. He had said goodbye, not in anger or sorrow, but in love, just as Martin had wished. And he knew, wherever Martin was now, that he would be proud of him. Thank you for watching. We're so grateful you took the time to experience Martin and Mathew's story with us. It's a reminder that love, no matter the circumstances, leaves a lasting mark on our hearts. Whether it's love lost, love found, or love that never had a chance to bloom, the important thing is that we carry it with us forever. If this story touched you, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Your support helps us continue creating content that resonates with you. Stay tuned for more heartfelt stories, and remember to keep embracing your truth and your heart's journey. Until next time, take care, and thank you for being a part of this journey.